This video is brought to you by the Deck of Many and their animated spell cards. Hello and welcome to the Gallant Goblin. Today we're taking a look at maybe my favorite Starfinder adventure path book so far, Planetfall, the first book of the Horizons of the Vast Adventure Path. Book 1 here was written by Ron Lundeen, and he'll be joining us here in just a moment to talk about it. This is a unique adventure path. Right at the start of the adventure, the PCs are put in charge of establishing a colony on an alien planet out in the vast. The first decision is picking out a spot to establish the settlement. From there, they'll have to explore the surrounding area using the hex-crawling rules first laid out in the Galaxy Exploration Manual here and reproduced in Planetfall. And they'll have to contend with the native wildlife on the planet, the various personalities of the other colonists in their group, and the other colonies that are also just now getting a foothold on the planet from various factions and corporations and governments from all around the galaxy. Each month, the PCs will decide how they want to build out their colony with loads of options to choose from. They'll have to make sure that they have enough resources, that the colonists are feeling safe and secure, and then decide what buildings to construct, which parts of the map to push their settlement into, and perhaps even where to build new settlements. So if all this sounds as exciting to you as it does to me, this may be an adventure for you. I wanted to bring the writer, Mr. Lundeen, in to talk about the adventure, to give us some tips on running it as a GM, and to talk about other projects he's working on. If you're interested in writing your own TTRPG adventures, Ron Lundeen is a person you're going to want to get to know. On his website, runamokgames.com, he writes a regular blog where he goes through the entire process of writing an adventure so you can see how the sausage gets made. It's an extremely helpful tool for anyone wanting to design and write their own adventures. So, without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Lundeen to the show. Ron, thank you for joining us today.
Sure, I'm absolutely glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Let me start just by asking, how are y'all holding up? I know that heat wave has been hitting y'all hard up there in the Pacific Northwest. Are y'all hanging in there, doing okay?
Oh yeah, we are. Fortunately, we're coming out of the end of it, which is nice. But for about four days there, we had all we have are a couple of window air conditioning units in my house, and we moved those to the bottom floor, the ground floor of the house, and that's where everybody had to sleep. You know, me and my kids, and the upstairs were like, that is the sun's domain, and no mortal shall tread in the domain of the sun. It's just too hot up there. So we did all right. We did all right. We've come out of it.
I'm glad y'all are through that and not have to worry about it anymore. So let's move on to something cooler. Starfinder, your new adventure. Now, this one is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was probably a quite different adventure to write than your normal adventure path. This one being almost purely sandbox.
Yeah, that's that one of the things about it that was really exciting to me is it's got a little bit of kind of, I guess I'd say hand holding at the beginning. It's like, all right, well, you know, you've landed and here are a couple things you need to do immediately once you've landed, but almost quickly, within a couple pages of the adventure, it's like, and now the whole world is open to you. Your whole charter is open to you to explore and see what's there. And there's no, other than the fact that things that are a little bit closer to sort of where you start are the things you probably are going to do sooner, there's really no control over where the players are going to go, because some of that freedom is actually part of the joy of this sort of type of sandbox adventure. So the bulk of the thing is all of the interesting places you can go, clues you can find that connect one to the other. That's a little bit challenging, because in a typical sort of more linear adventure, you can say, oh, well, you find clue A, you find clue B, and then it leads to this result because you know you're going to do it in that order. In this case, you might not do it in that particular order. So the clues have to kind of interlock no matter which ones you get at first. And that was a little bit of a challenge, but a really welcome one. That was actually really fun.
And it seems like there's kind of two tracks that you wrote the adventure in. You have the what happens back at the camp, what happens back at the colony. And some of that's depending on what they've discovered out in the land. So you have the whole, what's the word that I'm looking for? The whole, the colony, there's a specific word for it that I'm missing right now. The whole hex area that you explore, the charter. You have the whole charter they can explore. The whole charter. And then you have all the events that happen out there when you walk into those hexes. And then you have what happens back at the colony. And sort of depends on, when they discover this, maybe this triggers this event. And then after that event, you have this event. Did it feel like you're writing kind of two different tracks and trying to tie them back together again?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun too. One of the things that on one hand, I wanted to make sure that the players don't this is going to sound terrible. I want to make sure the players don't feel safe, is what I was about to say. And what I mean is, even though the danger is out there, right, that you're going to explore, just coming home, it's not the main settlement isn't just a place where okay, now we go back and then we're safe and we rest and we can buy stuff and things like that and then go out again. Sometimes when you come back to the settlement, something's gone terribly wrong and you're responsible for it. So it's up to you to be able to fix it. And sometimes what's gone terribly wrong is a direct result of something you triggered while you were out running around exploring. One of the ways that I like to picture that in my mind is, if you think of one of these adventures or entire adventure path like some sort of series that you're watching, on TV, you'll get to a point where you're like, all right, well, they've gone out, they've done something really difficult. Okay, you come back to the settlement, but something's gone terribly wrong, cut to the credits, and then you have to wait, right, for the next one and to see how they resolve what's gone on. I feel like there's
cliffhanger.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, apart from the one part of this adventure where there's literally hanging on a cliff involved, I feel like there are also other cliffhangers to be able to use.
And folks have been sort of comparing this a little bit on the forums to Kingmaker back in Pathfinder, where you are building out a kingdom, building out your charter. Did you look back to Kingmaker at all when you were looking at this, or you learn any lessons from that adventure path?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I actually ran a really long ongoing Kingmaker campaign that was a lot of fun with a really good group, and there were some really sort of really fun character personalities in that. And one of the things, in fact, that when I was looking to populate the settlement and even sort of the charter with characters, I remember thinking to myself, what were some of the fun things that my characters did that were really unique, sort of unscripted from the Kingmaker campaign, and get sort of themes like that sort of dropped in, right? The people I never thought they'd make friends with that I just sort of threw in sort of arbitrarily are now suddenly, major characters in my Kingmaker campaign. That's the kind of thing that I wanted to make sure to carry through. I mean, it's a little bit different, right? In Pathfinder, making friends with some sort of undead creature is a little bit weird because they are almost always bad guys. Here, all right, well, Eoxians are citizens, and therefore making friends with an undead is maybe not so weird. So...
And there's a particular undead encounter that can occur in here. I won't give any spoilers right now, but there's a wonderful page. That's 25, I think, characters that you wrote that are all the people who come on the initial ship that lands on the colony and sets up the colony. Do you have any advice? I wanted to ask out for your GM tips for running this adventure, because it's a little bit different than what people may be used to. Like tips for just starting off with basically 25 NPCs who are all there from the beginning, and the more the characters, the PCs get to know them, probably the more rich the adventure will be. Any tips for running that?
Yes, don't do all 25 or however many there are. The important thing is what I want to do is I want to put a lot of interesting characters out there for each GM's table to respond to, right? And it may be that some of them the players just don't care about, and that's fine. They kind of do their thing in the background. There's some of them that the players may take a really sort of a strong interest in, and whether that interest is some sort of rivalry or whether it's an alliance, or whether it's even a romance, right? This is something that plays out over years, and romance on the frontier is a trope that a lot of players can play into here. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure to that GMs know is that if you're trying to populate a cast of characters, you absolutely can't and shouldn't keep the focus on every single one of them all the time. Use them to play with what it is your players want to do. Now, some of them have a role in this story to play that the players don't know ahead of time. So it might be either somebody that they heard about but don't much care about suddenly becomes very important in the story, in which case you're like, oh yeah, we at least know that person exists even though we didn't much care about them. But occasionally it's going to be a situation where one of the fellow sort of settlers is somebody that they like or maybe even don't like, and then suddenly they become a much bigger part of the story, and then it's kind of fun. I think that provides a lot of good payoff. And I think that another piece of advice I have to the GM is, to the extent you can tweak which character it is that kind of gets a lot of sort of foreground. If in the adventure it says character X does this thing that's sort of major, and you're like, man, my players don't really like them, they like character Y a lot. If you can pivot to make it character Y, that might give them some more payoff.
That's excellent. The other question I was going to ask you too about running the adventure is that, a large part of it is expanding your charter and building up your upgrades. And the characters are expected to every month kind of sit down, every end game month, and decide kind of how they want to expand and grow. And I was going to ask, I could see that being a bit of a challenge in maintaining the role play of it, rather than just kind of sitting back, all those players around the table and kind of working on a spreadsheet. And do you have any advice for kind of keeping that thematic as they go through it?
Yes, actually, there are, and I have two pieces of advice for that. First, I think that people really dug into the kingdom turns in Kingmaker, and that was a huge part of the game, but it was also sometimes kind of a huge part of bookkeeping. And my experience with those types of really intricate subsystems, the not just the kingdom building in Kingmaker, but like the rebel system in the Hell's Rebels adventure path. You've got a couple of players around the table who get really excited about that, and everybody else sort of checks out and they're on their phones while that happens. And, so it's really thrilling for only some subset of your players. If it happens to be thrilling for all of them, great, but that doesn't seem to be likely the case. So two points. First, the actual subsystem in Horizons of the Vast is a little bit more focused. So it's not quite the accounting lift that Kingmaker can be. And I think that means it's a little more likely that people can be involved, stay involved. But secondly, there are a number of events that in the adventure that tie directly into the charter subsystem, right? So I don't want to say that it's something that necessarily forces the charter subsystem, but let me give you an example without trying to avoid being spoilery, right? You get to one part of the adventure where you can actually like morph the ground in a particular spot in your charter. And whereas that is maybe something you're like, oh, well, we want to create a big spire or a defensive wall or whatever. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that you can take this, or this upgrade. Now, you kind of learn a little bit about what those upgrades are. You're like, oh, okay, all right. And so if you've decided to make a particular kind of upgrade, you can be like, oh, well, now I know about that upgrade. Maybe we lean into that a little bit further because it's a thing that we know about, because the adventure kind of let us do it and kind of walked us into it.
Excellent, yeah. And I was also going to ask you too, just now you've written, this is the very first adventure in this adventure path. And so you get to kind of set the tone, you get to set up. I know Jason Keeley's working on the subsystems and has the overall arc in mind, but you also recently worked on Dominion's End, which was the very last level 20 adventure for Devastation arc. I was going to ask you, do you have, how different is it to work on a level 1 versus level 20 adventure?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yes.
a lot. And here's why. For a level 1 adventure, when you think about the challenges, you kind of have to think, all right, if I were like an actual person in this situation, how might I overcome it? It's because when you're level 1, you've got sort of the capabilities of genuine conceivable people. Whereas Dominion's End, which is, levels 18 through 20, I could just throw just the most ludicrous situations out there and know that there's some ability out there somewhere for the players to defeat. It's like, all right, well, this is a entirely sealed chamber and you've got to get at something inside, go, right? There's like 900 different ways a high level character can do that, but if you're for first level adventure, you kind of got to put a door so they can get at something inside, right? Even if it's a closed door or a locked door, right? And so the thinking about sort of character capabilities is something that plays into it a lot more for low level. you can kind of start to ignore that a little bit in the mid levels, and then you just ignore it entirely at the high level. They've got all the tools they need. They know how to use them.
And you were the very first person to write a level 18 to 20 book for Starfinder, so you didn't even have anything to go back and look at. That was all you. Like, was that a particular challenge for you?
I would say no. I was just more fun than anything else, right? Because I was the one kind of, breaking the ground for the highest level Starfinder thing that we've ever put out. And the thing that I wanted to do was make sure that first I could pull all of the huge bad threats that are just too powerful for anybody else to have thrown into an adventure before. I'm like, now I get to use these toys.
Yes.
And put them in. And then the same sort of build sort of more conceptual challenges than physical ones, if that makes sense,
Sure.
for the characters to overcome. But but in a lot of ways, even a level 20 adventure and a level 1 adventure can be really similar, right? You come across a group of people that are faced with this problem they don't know how to solve, and you help them solve it. And then in exchange, they're thankful and they help you with some clue or item or something that then helps you go on and solve this other thing, right? And I think that type of narrative structure, that sort of narrative hook, is something that all players understand. Where fundamentally, people, no matter what game you're playing, whether it's Pathfinder or Starfinder or Dungeons and Dragons, right? When people sit around the table, they're like, all right, well, we want to face some challenges to overcome, often fights. We want to tell stories about how we're sort of making the world just a little bit better than it was when we got here. We've solved some problems and helped people. And that's consistent throughout. And that's leaning into that is part of the fun of designing adventures generally. It's my favorite type of role-playing game writing to do is adventure writing. And that's why is telling these kinds of stories that are kind of themes that are sort of timeless across systems.
You've written a lot of adventure paths for both Pathfinder and Starfinder. Is there one in your heart that you kind of keep going back to that stood out, that was one of your favorites?
Well, I mean, it's always the latest one, right? I say Planetfall, right, is my answer right now because that's the latest one that I've done, or the latest one that I've been looking at and been excited about having people talk about as it moves through sort of the approvals and printing process here. I have one that I've written more recently than that for Pathfinder that I think it's been announced that we're doing it. I haven't been able to talk yet about a lot of what I've done, but the Quest for the Frozen Flame adventure path, which is sort of like the set in the Pathfinder realm of the Mammoth Lords, where you're members of a following, which is a little bit, it's kind of, Clan of the Cave Bear sort of, caveman sort of thing, putting myself into the thinking of the same sort of thinking of, all right, well, how do we face challenges? How do we help people? How do we overcome these things? But put them in the mind of somebody who is working in a very non-typical fantasy setting, right? Somebody who is nomadic and lives that experience. How are they going to try to overcome a problem? It's very different kind of thinking.
Yeah. That's completely opposite from Planetfall, where you're modern day and you're setting up a new colony. Yeah. Is it hard to shift those gears? Is that tough to do, or is it just like a good refresh that kind of gives you a whole new energy when you get into it?
It's exciting to do. I find it really thrilling, and there's usually a couple of weeks break in between. Like right now, I'm just kicking off some writing for some unannounced Starfinder writing, which is about as different from Quest for the Frozen Flame as you could possibly get. And so the fact that I've had a couple of weeks to sort of clear my mind, had the heat that you mentioned here to kind of bake my mind a little bit.
Yep.
It's good. It's refreshing. It's what keeps this thing fresh. I mean, so I've done, I want to say 15 or so of these different adventure path adventures. And that's the thing that keeps it fresh, is each one's telling a different kind of story in a different kind of frame.
And when I first got Planetfall just a couple of days ago, it was the very first adventure path for Pathfinder or Starfinder that I felt compelled to just read from cover to cover the moment I opened it up. Like, these are the kind of adventures, like, I love Kingmaker. I think in some ways, Ruins of Aslant is a little bit like this, where you have that kind of base colony that you're setting up and you kind of venture out from there. And I just love it. Do you have, like, who do you think, I don't know how to ask this. Now, what sort of GMs, if the GM is deciding if this is an adventure maybe for them and their group, do you have some tips on like maybe this would be a good fit for you if your players enjoy, what do you think? What kind of groups would really love this?
This is any groups that like making their own decisions on stuff will like this. And that's not to I don't want to disparage groups that don't like to make their own decisions. That is to say, there are plenty of players who, look, I want to hang out with my friends, put the danger in front of me. I want to roll dice and knock it down. That is a great way to play. And we've got, and our games support that style of play just as well. But if you've got a desire to kind of dig in and say, all right, no, I want to be the one to decide, right? Rather than decide when we get to the hall, do we go to the room on the left or the room on the right? But all right, what kind of leaders do we want to be? Planetfall lets you kind of lay the groundwork for the kind of leaders you want to be in this settlement on this far planet. And so I think there's a little more player investment, a lot more player agency. And so if you've got players who sort of want to be the ones to kind of take charge and lead the types of things that they're going to do, I think this is a great adventure for it. One of the things that really strikes me is that there isn't, although there are a few places where you can start your settlement in Planetfall, there's no real wrong answer in how you grow it. There are a couple of places where maybe it's a little bit easier if you grow it this way, but knowing full well that players like to have their own agency. This is the adventure path that draws players like that. It's not wrong if you see, oh, there is a great place to put a settlement, and that's why we're going to put one over here. Right.
And this, yeah, you're right. This is one of the first adventure paths that I've looked at where your heroes aren't starting off as nobodies, or the beat cop on the trail, or the Starfinder society like scrubs. You start off as the people in charge, the VIPs. You're making the decisions from go. Like, where are we landing the ship? You're the boss. And so I think that's really unique about this adventure path.
Well, and one of the things that we were careful to do for players that might be a little bit intimidated like that, like, oh, we make decisions, but I don't even know what to do, right? Is that we've got kind of this helper NPC who's really there to help be the voice of the GM and even the adventure author a little bit in, all right, well, I mean, yes, you can do anything, but this has this advantage, this has this advantage, this has this advantage, maybe pick from these three, right?
Right.
And I think that is kind of helpful. One of the things that we wanted to lean away from is sort of the narrative trope that the helper guy becomes the villain in the end. This guy is he's a helper to be the GM's voice for the players, and they not only can they trust him, they should trust him. He's a trustworthy guy.
Yep. Absolutely. Before I let you go today, I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about Run Amok Games. You have your own gaming company where you're writing your own adventure paths for Pathfinder and other adventures. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been working on with Run Amok lately?
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for bringing that up. That's my third party sort of, anything that Paizo or other third-party companies aren't letting me write, but are in my head and have to come out. I put them down there. Most recently, the biggest project that I've done independently is to write an entire Pathfinder adventure path from first level to 20th level, right?
The Scaldwood
that's right.
Blight,
the
right?
Scaldwood Blight, yes. And I'm doing some work on kind of, packaging that together, and there's going to be some exciting news coming out on that front. And one of the things about that I've been playing with there is how you present an adventure path, right? How do we do it in sort of a short, focused way to give the GMs maybe a little more agency? And the thing that is most exciting for me about that is that I just did the whole thing kind of out in the open in front of everybody for free. Mm-hmm. So it's like, all right, well, here's how you plan to write an entire adventure path. Here's how you set goals to do it. Here's how you break up the work into smaller and smaller chunks. Now I'm going to do this chunk, and here's kind of how I focused on it. And, then I skip ahead to this chunk and how you focus on it. So certainly everything is there for a full adventure path, although it requires maybe a little bit of poking around. And I've had a couple of people say, gosh, is there any way you consolidate this? And even if you're charging for it, like, yes, that was kind of the intent all along.
Yeah.
But one of the things that that I think is most useful that I'd like to let people know about Run Amok Games is my blog is primarily about role-playing game writing and design. I've got a lot of interesting tidbits that I come up with there, and it's anything from the very general to what makes a villain a good villain, right? It's what they do. It's not who they are. Is a short answer there. To here's the right way to draw an angled hallway and the wrong way to draw an angled hallway. So it's a real grab bag of advice that kind of comes in, but it's advice from the ground, right? It's things that I'm seeing every day in my own writing or the development that I do for Paizo. And so I hope people find that find that very, very useful, very helpful. I'm taking a little bit of hiatus from that for a while. Before I joined Paizo, I was a full-time corporate attorney, and I still have my law license. I had the opportunity to pick up a little side legal work that, for the most part, I was able to leave that kind of life behind for fantasy worlds about, orcs and spaceships and stuff like that. But every now and again, something kind of enticing will draw me back into the legal work. And I'm in a very good position. I'm very fortunate to be able to kind of pick and choose what I find kind of thrilling about that. And when I found something that was just thrilling enough, like, all right, well, I'll put the advice blog and the Run Amok Games just on hold for a couple of months, but I suspect it won't be long before I'm digging back into that and churning out the advice even more often than before. So keep an eye out there. Runamokgames.com.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because we here at the Gallant Goblin are sponsors of the RPG Writer Workshop, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, run by Ashley Warren, where people who are wanting to write their first adventures can get in there and just take some lessons, learn some things. And I think that your blog is a wonderful resource. I was scrolling through there today, and you have tons of advice. It's all tagged, so you can kind of find what you're looking for. So if you are one of those people who are looking to write your first adventure or just refine your workflow and how to do these things, like definitely check out Run Amok Games and what you put together there. It's really incredible. So thank you for putting that out there for everyone to learn and to grow.
Sure. And I'm always interested in hearing what challenges people have and what they might find useful. And my email's on the website, runamokgames@gmail.com. One of the things that I know, I'm very interested when you talk about this writer's workshop, people writing their first adventure, because my head is not often there, right? Some of the things that now come very easy for me after a lot of practice, or things that I assume because I've done it a lot. I know that I was somewhere back in the mists of prehistory. I didn't know that, right? And so it's exciting for me for people to say, look, I'm approaching this for the very first time, and I find topic X really confusing, or I find topic Y really intimidating. And is there some way to, you can give me some guidance on that? Well, anything that new adventure writers are struggling with, I guarantee you they're not the only ones struggling with it. And so that's the kind of thing that would make a very useful topic for me to opine on and get out there to other people.
That's awesome. What is the best way then for folks to find you if they're looking for you?
That is Run Amok Games at gmail.com. That's the best way to get a hold of me on the side. And that's a great. I also have my Paizo contact information sort of professionally. Ron Lundeen at Paizo.com is my sort of corporate day-to-day work. That's the 9 to 5 email I'm answering. But Run Amok Games is probably the best place to get a hold of me, sort of all the time, anytime.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you'll come back and talk to us about some of your future work when it comes out. We'd love to talk to you again anytime you want to.
Absolutely. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you again to Ron for joining us today. Planetfall is available now at Paizo.com or at your favorite game retailer. The softback book has an MSRP of $22.99, and the PDF version is available at Paizo.com for $15.99. It's also part of the Starfinder Adventure Path subscription. And you can find Run Amok Games at runamokgames.com. Book 2 of the Horizons of the Vast Adventure Path, Serpents in the Cradle, is expected to land in early August 2021. Also, be sure to check out the sale going on right now for the new sets of animated spell cards from Hit Point Press and Deck of Many. I absolutely love using these cards in my 5e games. Not only do they give me and my players easy access to the spell rules, but they're just stoking fun and beautiful. Each card has unique art and 8 frames of lenticular animation, and they have decks for all levels of spells for 5th edition, and they have cards that you can use for townsfolk and conditions, and the endgame magical item, the Deck of Illusions, which is a great reward for your adventuring party if you want to use it. They're currently on sale during the pre-order period, so go check them out today at animatedspells.com. And thank you for watching today and for being here with me and Tilly as she walks across my table. Be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss anything. Lots of fun things to show you in the next few weeks. Hit the bell icon down there to be notified when we drop new videos. You can find our merch at gallantgoblin.com/shop. Come chat with us on Discord and see all the latest happenings on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. For now, stay safe, have fun, love each other, and I'll see you next time at the Gallant Goblin.